Children often use drawing as a way of expressing emotions or feelings they can't yet put into words. Sometimes it's as simple as putting on paper the things most familiar to them. But when a child starts drawing herself holding hands with strangers, well, it raises questions. Martin and his wife are parents to two kids, a 6-year-old daughter, whom we'll call Jess, and a 3-year-old son. Jess is a creative, imaginative child who loves drawing, so her parents keep her stocked with art supplies, markers, colored pencils, crayons, and endless sheets of paper. They even bought her a Crayola backpack, loaded with everything she might need to fill page after page with her artwork. Most of Jess's drawings are just as you'd expect for a young girl. Cheerful, innocent scenes of flowers, animals, her family. But one day, Martin stumbled upon a drawing that stopped him in his tracks. In the picture, Jess was holding hands with a woman who wasn't her mom. The woman in the drawing was a brunette, whereas Martin's wife was blonde. Curious, Martin asked Jess about the woman in her drawing. "Oh, that's the lady who comes to visit me sometimes," Jess replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. It sounded like something a child might say about an imaginary friend. So Martin probed a bit further, asking Jess if this friend had a name. Jess simply said, "Lucia." The name immediately put Martin on edge. When he showed his wife the drawing and mentioned the name Lucia, she froze, exchanging a knowing, uneasy glance with him. Lucia was the name of Martin's wife's sister, who had passed away years before, long before Jess was born. Together, Martin and his wife went to Jess's room to try to understand what was going on. Gently, they asked her more about Lucia, hoping for a simple, innocent answer. But Jess's response was unsettling. She said that Lucia visited her sometimes, usually at night, when she was drawing. Martin's wife asked Jess if she could draw a more detailed picture of Lucia the next time she visited, to capture exactly what she looked like. Jess agreed without hesitation, and the couple left her room, now more disturbed than they cared to admit. From that night on, Martin and his wife decided to keep Jess's door slightly ajar, just enough to hear if she started talking to her friend. They didn't have to wait long. A few nights later, while they were in the kitchen, they both heard Jess's voice, softly speaking to someone in her room. They tiptoed towards her door and listened, straining to make sense of her one-sided conversation. Long pauses filled the room, with Jess seemingly answering questions her parents couldn't hear. At one point, Jess said, "They asked about you when they saw my picture. They want me to draw you again." Then, silence. That was when Martin and his wife stepped into the room, asking if Jess was talking to Lucia again. She nodded, and when they asked where Lucia was, Jess turned her gaze toward the corner of her room, pointing. "She's standing right there," she said. They glanced at the corner but saw only shadows. Yet there was something off, a strange, uneasy feeling that filled the air. Martin's wife softly urged Jess, "Sweetheart, draw Lucia just as you see her right now." Every detail Jess agreed and picked up her crayons, her face focused in concentration. Minutes passed before Jess called her mom back into the room, picture in hand. Martin and his wife braced themselves, their hearts pounding as they prepared to see the latest drawing. And it was worse than they could have imagined. In Jess's new drawing, the details of Lucia were unmistakably clear. She drew her with blue eyes, a small mole just above her lip, and dressed entirely in white. These weren't just random details. They were eerily accurate. Lucia had indeed been buried in white, and she had blue eyes and that same tiny mole above her lip. But Jess had never met her aunt, never even seen a picture. There were no photos of Lucia in the house, no stories about her shared with Jess. This was enough to push Martin and his wife over the edge. They told Jess that she couldn't talk to Lucia anymore. It wasn't that Lucia had been a terrible person or done anything malicious in her life. It was just the sheer unease, the feeling of the unknown lurking close to home, that deeply unsettled them. To put their minds at ease, they called a priest to bless the house and kindly ask any lingering spirits to leave peacefully. And according to Martin, after the blessing, things did calm down. They hadn't seen or heard any more signs from Lucia since then. But the eerie stories of children's drawings don't end with Jess. This next story comes from an elementary school art teacher who submitted her own experience. Twice a year with each class, she held an activity she called Draw and Tell. It was simple. The kids could draw anything that held meaning for them, and then they would share the story behind it. One year, with her third grade class, as the kids sketched scenes of their families, pets, or favorite places, she noticed one boy sitting quietly, filling his page with nothing but fire. Thick strokes of red, orange, and yellow flames covered his paper, flickering across the entire scene. The other kids at his table couldn't help but glance over and snicker at his unusual drawing. The teacher noticed this and walked over to ask him gently why he'd chosen to draw flames. "This is supposed to be something meaningful to you," she reminded him. The boy looked up and said calmly, "I know. I'm not finished yet." Curious, the teacher left him to finish, wondering what the end result would be. A while later, she came back to find he had added something new, a house in the middle of those flames. Realizing this drawing was more than just an innocent expression, the teacher took him aside, taking the drawing with them into the hallway. In a low, careful tone, she asked why he was drawing a burning house. It seemed like such a troubling choice for a third grader. His answer, however, was devastating. "It's not inappropriate," he said. "It's my house. It's the house my parents tried to burn down with me in it." The teacher was left speechless. She held the drawing, her heart breaking as she processed what he'd said. She knew this wasn't something she could share with the class. After a few moments, she gently instructed him to take his seat and decided to call off the draw and tell for that day, telling the class they'd take their drawings home instead. The unsettling nature of children's drawings is something some parents and teachers know all too well. Another parent, who wished to remain anonymous, shared a similar experience about their daughter Molly, who was just 5 at the time. Molly was a quiet, well-behaved little girl, a trait that made what happened next all the more chilling. Brad and Jane's nightmare began with something as innocent as Molly's late-night fears. Their bedroom was right next to Molly's, so when she came in one night saying she was scared of something in her closet, Brad did what any parent would do. He walked her back to her room and opened the closet doors, showing her there was nothing inside. He assured her it was just a bad dream, a figment of her imagination, and put her back to bed. But the next night, Molly was back, this time insisting that there was a monster inside her closet. Brad and Jane, feeling a pang of sympathy, allowed her to sleep in their room that night. The following day, she even drew a picture of this monster and handed it to her parents. Brad couldn't deny it. There was something unsettling about the drawing. But like any parent, he chalked it up to the typical childhood fears that come and go. That illusion shattered one night when they woke to Molly's blood-curdling screams coming from her room. They rushed to find her crying, her voice trembling as she told them, "I'm bleeding." She lifted her shirt, revealing 2 long, fresh scratch marks on her back. When they asked her what happened, Molly pointed to her drawing and said, "It was the monster." Brad's blood ran cold. He searched the entire house, every corner, every room, desperate to find anyone who could have caused this. But the house was empty. With no other explanation, Brad and Jane reluctantly decided it had to be a freak accident. Maybe Molly had scratched herself somehow, either on purpose or by accident. But even as time passed, Molly never wavered in her story. The monster had scratched her. The couple was so unnerved that they decided to move her things to a different room, hoping the change would help her sleep peacefully. In the days that followed, Molly did come into their room a few more times, but when they asked if she'd seen the monster again, she would just say, "No, I'm just scared." Thankfully, she didn't suffer any more strange injuries in her sleep. And yet, tales of chilling childhood drawings don't end with Molly's story. The next story was submitted by a young woman named Giovanna, who had recently found a drawing on her desk, a small but eerie discovery. Her 7-year-old brother often used her desk to draw, but he had an unusual habit. He would always take his drawings back to his room and hide them, but this one was left out in plain sight, as if he'd wanted her to see it. Curious, she took a closer look. At first, it seemed like any innocent family drawing, but something in the corner caught her eye, a dark figure labeled "The Taking Man." She shivered, unsure why he'd drawn it. The man was sitting on a swing, and though this might seem harmless enough, Giovanna knew they didn't own a swing set. Her brother had never asked for one and had never shown any interest in it. Could it just be an innocent detail, a figment of his imagination? Or was it something more unsettling? Underneath the mysterious figure labeled "The Taking Man," Giovanna noticed what looked like a small drawing of a door or a window, perhaps something leading underground. The detail was strange enough to push her curiosity further. She decided to investigate, heading out to the lawn to look for any sign of this hidden door, this secret window. But after a thorough search, she found nothing. A few days later, Giovanna was in the bathroom across the hall from her brother's room, washing her face. Through the quiet of the house, she heard her brother giggling and talking. It wasn't unusual for him to play alone, but something about the sounds tugged at her curiosity. After finishing up, she went to check on him. His door was slightly ajar, and as she peeked in, she saw him lying on the floor, his face turned toward something under his bed. She opened the door fully, stepping inside, and her brother quickly jumped up onto his bed, redirecting his gaze to the TV, pretending as if nothing had happened. When she asked who he was talking to, he shrugged, claiming he wasn't talking to anyone. Deciding not to push, Giovanna dismissed it as her brother's usual antics and went to bed. But the following morning, an odd incident made her question everything again.
And action!
Her brother woke her up holding an empty glass, asking if she could fill it with chocolate milk. She obliged, heading to the kitchen, bringing back the milk and even a few snacks. Yet when she returned to his room, he was fast asleep. When she gently woke him, handing him the glass, he looked at her, confused, insisting that he hadn't asked for anything. Though she knew he had asked, she didn't argue, simply leaving the glass beside his bed. Then, later that night, Giovanna was woken by the sound of her brother's voice yet again. It was around 4 a.m. She got up, crossed the hall, and peeked into his room. There she saw him, sitting up, facing a shadowy figure, a presence that felt almost tangible in the darkness. Her mind went blank. Her last clear memory, the image of her brother talking, and that dark shadow in the corner. She awoke the next morning in her own bed, unclear on how she'd gotten there. The next day, she confronted her brother, asking if he remembered anything about last night. He simply denied talking to anyone, his eyes untroubled. When she finally told their parents about the shadow, the strange conversations, and the drawing, they took her brother aside to ask about it. In an innocent tone, he told them, "The person in the picture is the taking man. He takes things and brings them back. I trust him. He's my best friend, and he gives me red berries. I think they're called cranberries. But now, he won't come back." Giovanna didn't know whether what she'd seen was a dream or reality, but the memory lingered, vivid and chilling. Her little brother never spoke of the taking man again,